All right, thank you. So before I jump into it, I want to talk just a minute about what I thought was a very interesting and unique background that I have. But then you come to a conference like this and you meet all sorts of much more interesting people with also very interesting backgrounds. So, but yeah, I grew up with a love of math and science, but I also have always loved things like arts and creative pursuits. So when I went to college, I did get a degree, a bachelor's degree in computer science, but it was a Bachelor of Arts in computer science. Then I went to work in IT and I started, dabbled in some different types of IT jobs like systems administration and network administration. And then I found programming, which allowed me to be more creative also. So then, in the process of working as a programmer, I was working at a technology company, and I quickly moved into management positions. So first as a manager and then as a director. And I learned that in addition to developing code, I really had a love for developing people. So fast forward a number of years, I was working at a company that had leading edge technology and a really great culture. And I decided to go back to school for a master's degree. And I remember I was reporting to the CIO of the company at the time, and he said, "What is this program and why are you doing that?" So that was the Master's in Adult Learning and Organizational Performance. And I said, well, I don't need to be the smartest person in the room. I'm not coding anymore. There's a lot of other really smart people here, and my role is to be a better leader and to learn how to develop people. So he never quite got that, but all of that led to my passion in culture as well. So I really wanted to help people be better, and part of that is providing an environment where they can really thrive. So I've had the opportunity to get involved in some of these efforts at Mutual of Omaha, which has a very different culture from the company that I came from, so that's been exciting. But let me talk about these images for a minute. You see the iceberg up there because for some companies, and I would have characterized Mutual of Omaha in this way, their culture is like an iceberg. It's frozen in time. For other companies, it's more like the pond, where it's more organic, it's more of an ecosystem. However, in either case, culture is really about what's beneath the surface. So we've been talking about culture. It is kind of a big buzzword in the industry these days. So let's just go over real quickly. What do we mean when we talk about culture? What do I mean when I'm talking about culture? It's the mindsets in the organization, beliefs. It's those behaviors. You've heard a lot of people talk about behaviors. It's traditions, the values, not just of the organization, but individual values, those unwritten rules. It's the energy of the organization or lack of energy in the organization. It's the attitudes, interactions, how people interact with one another, habits, norms, spirit. In other words, it's the way we've always done things. It's the way things get done in an organization. So don't let those fluffy words fool you, because culture can overtake strategy, right? It can be very powerful. So to illustrate this, a very simple illustration, this company, which direction is it going? Is it going to your right or to your left? Right? You have the strategy pulling it in one direction. A culture can pull it back. So just a very simple way to illustrate that. But the good news is it doesn't have to be that way. A culture can be systematically shaped. It's a choice. Every company has a culture. You just have a choice of whether it shapes you or you shape it, and whether it works with your strategy. But it is very difficult. As the previous speaker, I think, talked about, doing an enterprise-wide culture change is very challenging. And I know you've seen this. It's come up a couple times. But Peter Drucker, he says, culture trumps strategy every time. Culture eats strategy for breakfast. And some experts would say it eats operational excellence for lunch and everything else for dinner. Right? Malcolm Gladwell, who's come up as well, the author of the Tipping Point, blogged, "I've become convinced that culture is the most important predictor of where a company is going." John Kotter and James Haskett, both professors at Harvard Business School and authors, said, "Firms where leaders focused on their culture outperform firms that did not by a huge margin." So culture has the ability to gobble everything up. It's our strategies, our change management plans, efforts around innovation, operational efficiency, processes, mission, everything. So you can have the best strategy ever, but without a strong and aligned culture, the strategy will lose every time. So let's talk a little bit more about why is this so difficult? Why is it so challenging? Well, rather than being something that lives in your head, culture lives in our hearts and our guts. Rather than being something where you know what you should do, culture is what you do anyway. Rather than being something that's a master plan on a whiteboard, culture is our first contact with living people. So think about that experience in your organization, whether it's with a recruiter or in an interview or with HR or during onboarding. Maybe it's somebody who called into a contact center or a customer service department. Is every experience that they have with your company consistent? Every interaction with a human being the same and what you would expect to represent your company? And who are some examples of people who do that well? Disney, for the people who get to go on the tour. They have a very well-known program on training a certain interaction with their cast members, I believe they call them, not employees. What about here at the Four Seasons? And those of you who are staying here, have you noticed a consistent experience? I'd say they're doing a really good job at that. So, also, rather than being something that's very rational, it's a little bit more intuitive. It requires learning to engage both sides of your brain. You like that? I thought that was cute. You have to engage both sides of your brain, right? The right side and the left side, and figure out what makes people tick, and that can be challenging. Also, rather than being something that can be explained, it's more of something that you feel or that you just know. And unlike strategy, which describes a future state, culture is the reality of right now. And you need a clear grasp of this reality to understand how you can lay out a plan then to get to the future that you desire that is consistent with the strategy. And rather than being tied to an org chart or a design on an org chart that shows you who you should talk to get things done, the culture is more about who do you actually talk about to really get things done. So knowing that this manager went to college with the CEO, or this analyst plays golf on a regular basis with that VP, or this analyst goes to lunch once a week with that VP. It's the understanding the informal networks and some of those informal sources of power is important. Rather than being really a set of tools, it's about the body that puts those tools to work. And rather than being an idea, culture is an experience. And finally, strategy and values can describe intention and potential. But culture is innovation in action and implementation. So what? What does all of this mean? Well, some aspects of culture, as I've described them, are clear and apparent and observable. Again, as the previous presenter mentioned, behaviors is an example of something that you can observe or record. So, but there are other aspects of the culture that are not quite as observable. They're very deep and embedded, and they're beneath the surface. So these are things like, just things that are understood and hard to detect. So things like perceptions, attitudes, values, beliefs, not really visible in that regard. So ultimately, culture does set the foundation for strategy, so it's critical to have a full understanding of those things, both visible on the surface, but those things that you can't really see either. So what happens when the culture and the strategy are not aligned? Well, the short answer is that misalignment sinks performance and almost guarantees the organization will not achieve the results that it desires. So new ideas, initiatives, transformation can't survive resistance to change and bureaucracy. Culture can chew them right up and lead to poor results. So before embarking on a culture change, or a strategy change, you have to make sure that you understand that organizational culture. And because leaving it unattended is like not attending to a foundation when building a house, right? It might look okay when it's done for a while until it starts to fall apart and crumble. So how do you align? How do you align culture to strategy? So this is really the question of the day, and I think why you're all here. The very first thing in our approach at Mutual of Omaha is, and I think I would suggest for most leaders, you have to be willing to ask yourself some really tough questions. Do you really know what your current culture is? And would your employees agree with your assessment of what the culture really is? There are a variety of ways that you can assess the culture. We talked about culture surveys. There's a lot of different tools that can be used, some very sophisticated, some very simple. They can be used just to baseline what your current state is. But the next question is, what do you want it to be, or what do you need it to be to support the strategy? And then having your entire leadership team agree on that. That can be very challenging. It's not easy to define, and it's even harder to make that shift. So it takes a lot of commitment of time and money. So I'll tell you, at Mutual of Omaha, we embarked on this strategic journey to become more customer-focused a few years back. And our executive team did engage with a third party to conduct a culture assessment, or culture survey. And they identified our strengths and our opportunities through that. And then out of that, we're able to design a culture shaping workshop. It's a 2-day workshop, and a support system to take us through this journey. So we'll talk more about that journey in a minute. One of the things, though, that you may also learn as you go through this process is that the people who got you where you are may not be the right people to take you into the future. So it's important to know that changes like this take all leaders to support both the strategy and the commitment that it takes to change thought habits, which then will change behaviors, which will then lead to the results that you need. So at Mutual of Omaha, we started with our senior executive team and the C-level. They all went through the 2-day workshop as a group, and then the next level down, all of their direct reports went through the workshop. And then at level 3, we had all management across the organization go through the workshop. And we're currently in the level 4 phase, which is all associates. So we're talking about 5,000 people, and will probably take us through at least through the end of next year, I'm guessing. We're about 25 or 30% of the way through. And this is being done with internal facilitators such as myself, who have been certified to conduct these workshops. So, and another thing that's been mentioned already, but it's really, really important to look at your systems and processes as well. So if you're working towards a culture of teamwork, you don't want incentives that encourage people, that pit people against one another. So I'll tell you a quick story, because I think I'm about out of time, about 2 companies who had fiercely competitive boards of directors. And they wanted to organize a challenge, a rowing competition, to challenge each other's organizational and sporting abilities. The first company, Company X, was a very command and control, ruthless autocratic company with 0 staff empowerment. The next company, Company Y, had a culture of developing people and teamwork. So when race day came, Company Y appeared from the boathouse first with their crew, 8 rowers and a helmsman. Next followed Company X with their crew, 8 helmsmen and 1 rower. So who do you think won? Right? Not surprisingly, Company Y won with an easy victory. Well, the rest of the story is the next day, when the board of directors got back together from Company X to have a post-mortem about what had happened in this embarrassing defeat. They had a very long, wearing meeting to talk about what they needed to do. And they finally came up with their decision. They decided that the rower should be replaced immediately because clearly he had not listened well enough to the instructions he had been given. They also decided, well, for next year's competition, let's try the same strategy. So the following year, the 2 companies once again raced, and this time, Company Y won by an even bigger margin than the year before. Why? What had gone wrong? While they had adopted the same strategy, they had not addressed their culture, which lacked any sort of teamwork. So again, the moral of the story is that strategy alone can't move you in a new direction if your culture is pulling against you. Now again, that's fictional, but there are real examples of companies that are facing this. I know Southwest is here. Southwest is a winner. How many of you have flown on TED? TED? Anybody? Anybody? Yeah, they're a loser. So TED had the same strategy as Southwest. You know, low cost point-to-point, single plane, different cultures. So TED was a spin-off of United, and they had adopted United's culture, so did not survive for very long. So final word, just that there is a beacon of light. There's hope. At Mutual of Omaha, we are investing a lot. We have 16 internally certified facilitators. We're doing 2-day workshops for about 5,000 employees. That's a huge investment in time and money. We also have a growing number of culture champions across the organization. At every workshop, we give people an opportunity to support this initiative ongoing. We have created videos to continue to support it. We have posters, lots of reminders, and monthly leader-led activities to reinforce the ideas and to introduce it for those who haven't been through the workshop yet. You start to hear common language. People talk about mood elevators and blue chips and things like that. We all know what that means. The behaviors that we're expecting. We talk about accountability. A lot of companies talk about empowerment, but what is empowerment without accountability? If people don't feel accountable for the results, what does it do to empower them? So again, cultures can be systematically shaped with the right leadership support and commitment, leading to successful strategy. And final thought, some people would say, you know, if you invest all this time and energy and money, what if people leave? And the answer is, well, what if you don't and they stay? Thank you.